As we begin today, I want to acknowledge that I am located in Lloydminster on the border of Alberta and Saskatchewan in the heart of Treaty 6 territory. Before the arrival of the explorers and settlers, many First Nations traveled through and thrived in this area, which also includes the homeland of the Métis. I was born here, but I chose to return here as an adult. And now, after unlearning what I was taught in public school in the 1970s and 1980s, and relearning a less whitewashed history of this place, I see this land and its stories through very different eyes. I acknowledge that the roots of my family on the prairies came at the cost of the First Nations people who were here long before. Their land was taken so that my ancestors could farm and build their lives in this place that became known as Canada. I cannot change the past, but I can try to move forward in a good way by sharing what I've learned about the Indigenous peoples whose teachings are so intricately tied to this land and all it encompasses. When I had first planned to include a segment about residential schools, I had titled it, "Why Don't They Just Get Over It?" because it is a question I have heard over the years. My original subtitle was basically an answer to that question. This is what happens when your identity, family, language, spirits, stories, and connections to the land are broken. However, when we filmed this episode, the conversation began as a discussion about the notion of walking in both worlds, having traditional Indigenous knowledge, but also a Western education, something that residential school survivors were denied. Over the years, Mr. Fine has shared many of his residential school experiences with me. This has been part of my role as a listener, but also as a witness to truly hear his experiences. I thank Mr. Fine for trusting me with his memories. Many of these stories have brought me to tears. They are difficult to listen to. However, as you will see in this episode, there are also moments of laughter. I've learned that humor is one of the ways that Mr. Fine has been able to process his experiences, by joking about them. In a Shakespearean play, we would call that black humor. However, this is reality, and these stories are true tragedies inflicted by adults upon innocent children. Mr. Fine is sharing stories as he knows and has experienced them, which may differ from those told within other Indigenous communities and settler institutions. Throughout the series, we discuss various plants and traditional healing methods. This is not intended to replace medical advice from trained healthcare providers. Some episodes contain graphic descriptions of events witnessed and experienced by the guest at his time in residential school and at various points throughout his life. They may spark memories and questions, so we are asked to listen with open hearts and minds. Viewer discretion is advised. So part of this is also that idea of walking in both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of alluded to that with your son.
Yeah. And, for me, the education I received, it was basically being tortured and being told how worthless I was and how I would never amount to anything. And, basically being told, why don't you just kill yourself, And when I got out of school, I escaped. I got work, but it was picking rocks and picking roots. It was not something anybody wanted to do, anybody with a education. But it was all that was open to me, so I lived like that for a while, because I needed to survive. But I made sure, that my sons became knowledgeable. And part of becoming knowledgeable was to become educated, but also to question your education. Why do they tell you this? Are they trying to build you up or undermine you? Be aware of that, always. It'll tell you who your friends are, who can be trusted and who can't, Yeah. And who you should always be careful around. And it got to the point, where, I mean, my boys, especially Leon, became so sensitive. Like a couple of blocks away, he'd say to me, "Dad, slow down. There's cops up ahead." But he was always scanning, eh? He knew where I had come from. He knew that there was a target on my back, that I was always being hounded. Tried to help me. But it cost him too, emotionally. But not to the point where he was ashamed that I was his dad. He said, "That's one thing I've always been proud of. Even though you were such a bad," he said, "people thought you were such a bad." But I always felt proud of what you were doing because it was stuff that no other Indians were doing, I said, "Yeah." Often when I yelled charge and I looked back, I'd see arrows flying at me and bullets from the other direction. But I persevered. I didn't give up. I refused to give them the satisfaction. "You ain't getting it from me." And it cost me. But I hope that, the payment that was extracted included the payment for my sons. Yeah. Although I say, I would be happy to do their suffering, but I can't. Otherwise, I'd have a couple of useless kids. But that's how they had to learn. And so they both became educated. Leon is now a lawyer. And Max, he's got his own company, consulting. They're both busy, and they both have a vision. These laws need changing. Let's change them. And you don't change them by protesting. You go and run in an election and you get elected, and then you go into the places where changes can be made. And that's where you change them. You educate those guys that are there, and explain to them why it's so necessary to change these things. Because the future is coming. And if they continue with their behavior, they're going to be called to pay for what they've done. And if they don't pay, then it's your children. And I always say the mistakes I have made, and they are not few. But please, of all the mistakes I've made, let me bear the brunt of what, if I've overstepped boundaries, let me pay for that. Don't let it move on to my children. They'll have their own mistakes to make. But let me at least carry my own burdens so that it doesn't transfer to them. And that was one thing I tried so hard to keep out of my children's lives, was my suffering and my running and hiding, because I was being hunted down, I would have a job for a time, and then I would be told I was no longer needed there or welcome there. So I never ever was in a position to be able to provide for my kids the way I wanted to be able to provide for them, because I lived from gig to gig. That's no way to live. Yeah. And so I tried to make sure that my children got a good education, but they also got a good traditional education. Now they have a team. You see, either or. Wherever they have to reach out to for help, they do it. Yeah. And it reminds me, brainwash. And I think about crawling under a log, hiding in a swamp with the principal and some staff after me, because they had seen me make a run for the bush. And how I jumped into the water and crawled under a log and laid there while they stood on that log, looking around for me with a telescope to see where I would pop up in the slough. But they were standing on my head. And I didn't let them know I was there, and finally they left. And I followed, and I watched the principal. He was carrying his telescope. And then he stayed back, and he found a place by the bush, and he dug a little hole, put his telescope in there, and then covered it up and left. Well, I went and took that telescope and moved it, and I hid it somewhere else. I couldn't be caught with it, so I thought, well, I'll just move it. So that he'll never find it again. He'll have to use his eyes to look for kids. But, those years were, they're not easy to talk about, those ones. Well, I showed you that one, where that woman was watching while the baby was thrown into the furnace. She was a little girl. Her friend had a baby when she was 7, The nuns took it and tossed it in the furnace. And it went off like a little pop, they said. When you see things like that, and they tell you to do something, and you do it, man. I don't want to be the next to go in the furnace. I spent enough time in the coal bin. I often wonder if they had meant to throw me in the furnace. I spent so much time in there, shoveling coal. And it was something that I was made to do as punishment, But one of the women that worked, there was a hole in the wall that I had to crawl through to get into the coal bin. And there was a hallway there that went from the kitchen to the laundry room. And this Indian woman used to walk there, Mrs. Pratt. But she would see me shoveling coal there. And I guess she felt sorry for me. I didn't get fed, because one day I heard her, "Assam." And I looked, and she was standing at that hole. So I walked over there, and she pulled a sandwich out of her apron. "Nah. Make sure you eat it all," she said. "If you leave any of it, I'm going to get in trouble. I'll get fired. I'm not supposed to help you. I'm supposed to feed you." So I ate it all and went back to shoveling coal. and thinking someday, give me lots of time to meditate. Shoveling coal. Yeah.
So the telescope was one form of revenge, but is survival another form of revenge?
It wasn't meant as revenge. I needed to survive. I wanted to survive. I didn't want to live in that place and that be my only experience. I wanted to go back, live at home, do what I wanted when I wanted, which is not something I could do. And even one year, they kept me the whole year. Didn't let me come home. Didn't tell me why. It's because they needed me to shovel coal, They didn't want to hire a man to do that. Yeah. So I spent that entire summer shoveling coal and thinking, how am I going to escape? How am I going to get out of here? And if I decide to escape, I better have a plan where I will get away. Because I know if they bring me back here, they'll try and kill me. They used to shave the heads, take your clothes, your shoes, and you'd have to live wearing a sheet for a month. That was after they whipped you. Sometimes they whipped you with 40 lashes, sometimes with 100. Then they give you a sheet to wear. Take all your clothes. And they did that to girls too. They would put them in the middle of the room on a metal table, bend them over that and hold them down while the principal whipped them. And we would have to sit there and watch. Yeah. Sometimes there was a lot of blood. I tried to get over it. And not let it color my future too much. But it has. But now I no longer put myself into situations where they have a direct view of the target on my back or my front. I'm not such a hopeless person anymore, either. That was how I came out of that school. I was hopeless and helpless. Just every part of me was broken. My mind, my body, my emotions, and my soul. They tried to destroy every part of me. And I did all I could to keep as much intact as possible. When they started whipping me, I danced. And part of that was so that the other kids would have an example. Because so many children, we'd get told to line up and they start crying right away, even before we knew why we were being lined up. Because usually it was for whippings. And they might accuse you of anything. Or it could be just made up. And if no one took responsibility for it, then everybody got whipped, even the little ones. And so I used to say I did lots of things to keep them from being whipped, because I knew how terrified they were, how they would squeal and cry and before anything even happened. Before they were taken out of the line, they would be falling down. So, I rarely go into these details because people say it couldn't have been that bad. Yeah, right.
It's a system based on fear and shame, power, control.
Well, for me, the time frame that I went to school, 1955, and it was 10 years after the Second World War. There was lots of soldiers and servicemen in the country. Those are the guys they hired to come and be to look after kids. These guys that had been so badly injured and traumatized in the war that they had no kindness. And the way they interacted was marching around and yelling orders. And we had to march around too, even in the playground. When that supervisor was out there, we marched all around the schoolyard. And we never got to play. So, some of us would sneak out after night, after the principal, after the supervisor was in bed, and slip out the holes under the fence that we had dug, run off into the bush and set snares. And if we caught rabbits, we'd cook them out there in the bush. Yeah. And if we had friends inside who couldn't come out with us or who were too scared to come, we'd take some rabbit pieces back for them. But we had to be careful not to have any bones left over. We had to be really crafty so that we couldn't be tracked, helping each other.
Because splitting students apart and splitting families and siblings apart was part of the strategy too.
Absolutely. For the time that I was there, I never ever saw my sisters, like 10 months of the year. And I rarely saw my brothers because we were always in the playground at different times. Yeah.
So when you think about Indigenous families and the importance of kinship and family and ancestors and connections, Wakotawin, and the residential schools were set to break all of that apart.
Mm-hmm. And for instance, when you came from home, you lived in a little shack. At night, everybody piled up in a corner on blankets or mattresses or something to sleep. You go to school and they make you sleep by yourself in the bed. Well, lots of times kids would go and sleep with their siblings because that's what they're used to, who sleeps alone, Not the priests or nuns. So, and then we would be punished for that. Yeah. You had to wake up real early and sneak back to your bed. Or, both of you would get a good beating. And for me, one time, the lights got turned out. We were supposed to go to sleep, and I had smuggled a couple of slices of bread out of the kitchen. because my brother had just arrived at school and he wasn't used to this food we were getting fed. And so a lot of stuff he wouldn't eat. But I would sneak bread out of the kitchen and take it to the dorm and give it to him after, so he wouldn't be hungry. I was doing that one day and handing him the bread when the lights went back on. And I just dropped the bread and he grabbed it and pulled it under the blanket. And I heard the supervisor yelling, "What are you doing over there?" I didn't say anything. "I can't sleep." "Oh, well, come over here." So I went over there. Took me into the washroom. "Fill up that wash bucket there. And that brush. Bring a brush." "No, that one's too big. Bring a toothbrush. Bring your toothbrush." So I grabbed one of the other kids' toothbrushes, and had no idea what he was trying to do. But he made me go up all the way up the stairs to the top. "Since you can't sleep," he said, "it's probably because you're not tired enough. But I want you to scrub all these landings with that brush, that toothbrush, all the way down to the bottom. And when you get down to the bottom of the stairs, to the bottom floor, make sure you wash this bucket out good and clean it with your brush too. And then you can go to bed. You should be tired enough by that." So I spent all night scrubbing stairs with a toothbrush. And I just finished, got up to the dorm, and all of a sudden the lights came on, the bell rang, and the supervisor came walking in. "Wakey, wakey, rise and shine, the sun's in the heavens and the morning's fine." He was an old soldier, and he used to have all these things. But I didn't get any sleep. And I went to class like that. And I guess I fell asleep with my hands on my desk, because I hadn't slept all night, and all of a sudden I felt this pain on my hands and opened my eyes, and there was the teacher with a yardstick, wrote it down on my hands and was about to do it again when I pulled back. And, she hit my hands so hard they swelled up, and I couldn't hold a pencil because I couldn't write. And she said, "Well, you better go to the infirmary. Here, I'll give you a note. Take it to the infirmary." And so I was sent to the infirmary. And that woman that worked there put me in a room behind the infirmary and kept me there for a week. And, when she left, she would turn all the lights out, But she would often come back in the middle of the night and get into bed with me and, stuff like that. Yeah. "Now be a good boy," she'd tell me. Yeah. But then always when she left, she locked the door and turned the light out, and the light switch was outside the door. And so I sat in the darkness for a week, because there was a window, but it had covers over it, And I wasn't supposed to go and look out the window. But after a week, the swelling went down in my hands, and they sent me back to school. Yeah. But it was not unusual, it was not sure. It was shortly after that, I think, I saw These 29 girls lined up in the hallway outside the principal's office. And apparently they had mailed a letter to Indian Affairs. They had had a kid from the reserve smuggle it out and mail it, complaining about sexual abuse they were undergoing in that institution. You know, that was on a Friday, I think, Thursday or Friday, that young guy went and mailed that letter. Monday morning, it's a big black car parked in front of the school, and a couple of guys in suits came in, went into the principal's office, and then they left. And all of a sudden there was this row of 29 girls standing in the hallway. These were the girls who had signed that letter saying they were being sexually abused. And I was outside scrubbing and waxing the hallway when the principal was ready. I was right by his office, and he opened the door, and there was a girl sitting on the bench. He just nodded to her, and she pretended she didn't see, and he told her, "Come in here." And she just looked down, and she said, "I don't want to." And he came out, and he punched her right in the arm, and he broke her arm. And then he grabbed her, and he dragged her in there. And I heard her crying in there. And then she came out, and he made her sit on the bench again. And he came over to where I was, and he said, "Oh, they called an ambulance. Maybe police will be coming too," he said, "because this girl's arm is broken." And when they get here, the ambulance and the police, if they ask, they're going to come, and I'm going to tell them you saw what happened. So they'll come and ask you. And when they ask you what happened to that girl, you told them that she fell off a swing. Okay? So that's what I did. I said, "She fell off a swing." "Did you see her?" "Yeah, I saw her." And the things we had to do, well, I've never ever told anybody. Because I didn't want to traumatize my children. I tried to keep them safe and away from that. And I tried to teach them about cops and social workers and teachers. And try to defend themselves, protect themselves. And how can you do that? Well, you need an education. You got to get educated. There's no way around that. If you don't, well, you're going to end up like me. You're going to end up always a target in someone's sights, because you know what your destiny is, same as mine. But you should have more to work with than I did. You shouldn't be making the same mistakes twice. Let's learn from our experience. Yeah, just one day, a truck pulls up outside your house. Two white men get out. One has a little stick. They're looking for kids. Kids. Well, one time I was able to make it out to the bush where they couldn't catch me. And so he didn't get caught till the next year. But being herded onto the back of that truck with a stick. And then we're driving away and looking back, and my parents are standing in front of the log house watching us leave. And I remember my mother has flour on her hands because she was making bannock. And she was wearing her apron. And when we were leaving, I saw her. Take her apron off. And walk in. Didn't need that much bannock. They didn't wave and we didn't wave. We didn't know where we were going. Didn't see them for a year. And when I did, it was different. Turned into drunks. Stopped caring. And I thought someday, somebody's got to pay for this. I'll never let them do that to my kids. If I ever have any kids. There was no choices. It was simply, there was one option, and that was to surrender. And you could walk into that prison. And you didn't, and you got carried in. I remember a kid who ran away from there in the wintertime. And they brought him back to school. He was frozen in the shape. They had found him like that in the bush. And they couldn't straighten him out. They had to thaw him out first. Because he froze. And then he disappeared. I don't know what became of him, Yeah. And I remember, I think when I was drunk, saying something to my dad about that. And he said, yeah, we went through the same thing. And now they killed kids when we were there too. And he hadn't been able to stop them from taking us. He was able to stop. He warned me, run, the first year. Go hide. And I went and hid in the bush, and they didn't find me. And so for a year I was spared. But then they caught me next year, because they caught me in the house before I could make a run for it. My mother was sitting here listening. She never listened before.
We've had a lot of visitors today.
Mm-hmm.
I said we've had a lot of visitors today.
Yeah, we have. My mother was sitting right beside you, listening. I guess these are the things I never mentioned. She never heard, but I mean, she experienced them too. It's not that she didn't know about them. It's just that we never spoke of them, you know? We never spoke about what good educations we got.
You and I have also talked about how, we want to protect our children.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, for me, I was unable to protect my children initially. And it was only, until Leon and Max came along that I was able to give them what I had earned along the way, the ceremonies, the songs, the sweats, the spirits, and they knew about all that before they even got an education. Then they went and got educated, Now they both have degrees and businesses, and it's a step up from where I ended up, I'll tell you.
But you are one of the wisest, strongest, most powerful people I've ever met.
Mm-hmm. I had to be, My teachers always said, this is going to be a lonesome journey. You're on this path. Not many people on it. You have to have strong faith. Yeah.
And you've stayed on that path.
Yes. I wasn't wanted anywhere else. Yeah. But I always felt welcomed by the spirits. Yeah. And supported and healed. And had many sicknesses that they drew out of my body and healed me. You ain't done yet. You got more work to do.
You and I have spent, it's been 10 years, and so many of our phone calls have been, or so many of our visits have been phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
But sitting here together is a real honor too. And to do this in person.
Mm-hmm.
And feel the energy and the emotions and
Yeah.
the spirits.
It's a good thing. Powerful thing.
It's been a fine day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to continuing these conversations. Thank you to Mr. Fine Day for his time and stories. Special thanks to the Lloydminster Public School Division Prairie Thunder Boys Drum Group for providing the music for our podcast. We also want to acknowledge Lakeland College for the use of space and equipment, as well as TELUS STORYHIVE for their support.